Welcome back. One of the things that stood out in the recent election was that Albertans who opposed Trudeau's oil policies spoke out very clearly, giving Conservatives a clean sweep in the province. So what's in store for the Canadian oil patch? Joining me here is Michael O'Brien, Portfolio Manager at TD Asset Management. Nice to see you.
Okay.
Let's start off with there's a variety of outcomes that could have happened with this election. How would you rank this outcome for the oil patch?
I would say it was more of a status quo than you would expect. I think, some people were quite concerned, but I think the key was it's a minority Liberal government, but it's a very solid one. Mm-hmm. They're in a pretty strong position. So I think dealing with the other minority stakeholders here, they're going to be dealing from a position of strength. So I think there's going to be more continuity than people might have feared. And I think that's what you've seen in the stocks. The last 2 days, they've actually acted quite well.
Let's talk to some very specifics because everyone's talking about Trans Mountain. Is that something that is still subject to politics at this point? Or have we gone beyond that now and we're just waiting for things to get done?
Well, you'd like to believe it's beyond politics. That's never quite a done deal. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I think there's a very important issue there, which is despite the dynamics in Parliament where it's a minority parliament, the legislative authorization has already been given. So really what we're dealing with in terms of getting Trans Mountain expansion across the finish line is more regulatory and legal hurdles, court challenges, permitting, things like that. So we're kind of beyond the legislative setting.
What about the other two pipelines? So we're talking about Enbridge Line 3, I believe, and TransCanada Keystone.
Yep. They're also largely unaffected by this simply because the Canadian part of those two pipelines has already effectively been dealt with. Really, the issues facing Line 3 and Keystone XL are actually U.S. state issues. So, dealing with the permitting process and environmental studies in Minnesota for Line 3, some court challenges in Nebraska, and again, permitting for Keystone XL. So again, kind of beyond the purview of the Canadian government here.
Then what would you say is the most important consequence then of this recent election to the overall energy sector? I mean, you said it's kind of status quo, but is there any other thing we can read into it?
Well, maybe when I say status quo, the initial thought is, well, that's good, right? Well,
maybe
not really.
Yeah.
I mean, what it really is, I guess the way I would phrase it is this is kind of, in some senses, a missed opportunity for a bit of a reset in terms of investor sentiment towards the sector, because what we're really seeing here is more of the same with maybe a bit more of a leftward pull from the minority parties. So whether it's the Bloc Québécois, or whether it's the NDP or the Green, they all place a very high importance on environmental matters. And so that, center of gravity that the Liberals have is going to be tugged a little bit further. So I think what it does is it just pushes out that moment that people have been hoping where they might see a more investor-friendly, more pro-energy regime in Ottawa, so that's been postponed here.
And I guess the one thing I've heard, for the past little while is about the Canada discount, going on to the energy sector overall. I assume, you said you've seen a better performance in the past couple of days, but it's still there then, I assume. Yeah,
well, it's. I think we're at the stage now where some might have been optimistic. Maybe this would be a turning point. Maybe some electoral outcome would give them a fresh start, improve sentiment. That's behind us now. It didn't happen. We're dealing with what we have now, which isn't awful. It's manageable. But I think what it really means is, as investors, we just have to be patient and let the process grind through for all three of these pipelines that are very, very important for the future of the sector. Permit by permit, court challenge by court challenge, they just have to grind through the process, which really is saying investors have to be patient. And I think what that also means is, that day where Canadian energy equities get re-rated and where Canadian energy, when investors really re-engage with the sector in a material fashion, it's probably going to take a little bit longer.
I wanted to finish with asking you any positive catalysts coming, but it sounds like it's just that grind. It's just that when you get those approvals and the court challenges, what happens with those?
Yeah, that's the grind towards the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is pipelines. Yeah. The good news that could come or that could lie ahead is actually on the temporary fixes or the temporary solutions that have been put in place and which have actually been quite successful. So what I'm referring to specifically are crude by rail and the curtailment policy that the Alberta government put in, which both have done a really nice job of keeping Western Canadian discounts in check. And so you could see a pretty important development on that any day now. Premier Kenney has made no secret that the provincial government doesn't want any part of the crude by rail contracts the previous government had signed, and he's looking to offload those to the private sector. The quid pro quo there is, in return, the private sector would like to have the ability to increase their production. So you would have a combination of transfer of the contracts to companies like Canadian Natural Resources, Cenovus, and in return, they would be permitted to, return some of the curtailed volumes. So in other words, it's a bit of a win-win where you're getting crude out of the province, you're preventing those bottlenecks from blowing out the differentials, and in return, the production actually can grow for some of these companies that are being curtailed at the moment.